Bonjour, my name is Sheena Peril and I'm a knitter and writer from the Pacific Northwest. And today I want to talk about 10 ways that knitters and crocheters can prevent repetitive strain injuries in their hands and wrists. So knitting and crochet are very repetitive tasks, even if they're very enjoyable, and that can lead to some pretty bad injuries of your hands, wrists, and elbows, also into the shoulders. So these types of injuries are completely preventable, and I'm going to tell you a few ways that you can keep your crafting going longer. And I'm not just talking about the individual sessions, but also longer into your life. So the number one way that you can prolong your knitting and crocheting life is to take breaks. Typically what's recommended for every hour of work to get up and walk around for 10-15 minutes. We also want to prevent eye strain, so looking at things that are further away than your craft. You might want to do a couple of stretches that I'm going to recommend later on, and just walking away from your craft for a couple of minutes, get up, drink some water, go to the bathroom, grab a snack, and come back, and that'll give your muscles a time to rest, and it'll give your skeleton a time to go back into a more natural position. Number 2, change your needles and hooks. I know a lot of knitters and especially crocheters tend to work with more budget items, and these are great. They're fantastic. It makes the crafts more accessible. However, the difference between using that $5 hook from Walmart versus an ergonomic hook that might cost a little bit more can be huge. I myself was a very avid crocheter from middle school up until college. And when I was in college, it got to the point where I could no longer crochet, as well as doing things like typing up papers and doing the other work that I had to do for my major. So that was when I learned how to knit, because it was the only way that I could still craft without pain. If you really like metal hooks and needles like me, try using something that is warmer and softer, like wood or plastic, something that's a little bit more flexible. You can also try hooks and needles with different shapes, like square needles, which are supposed to help with things like arthritis pain, and more ergonomic needles like the furls hooks that have a larger grip on them. Number 3, do stretches. There are a lot of stretches that you can do, and I've got a video planned on some that are great for knitters and crocheters, but here's just a couple that you can try out. The first one that has helped me the most is what I call the prayer. You just put your hands together and lower them like this, and that's a cat. So you just hold your arms like this. You want a straight line from your elbows through your wrists, and we never want to do any stretch to the point of pain. A little bit of discomfort is okay. That means that you're getting the good stretch, but it should never hurt. And that stretch is going to work right here and help prevent carpal tunnel. Second stretch that you can do is, a lot of times when you're knitting and crocheting, you sit hunched over. So we need to open up these chest muscles. And the best way that I've found to do this, there's 2 different ways. Number 1, put your arms behind your back and lock your hands. If you can reach higher up onto your wrists or your elbows, that's even better. But at least get your hands as close together as possible and then lean forward. And what you're looking to do, especially when standing, is for your back to be straight across with a 90-degree angle to your hips. And that's going to help open up your chest area. If that is not possible for you, the other thing you can do is roll up a towel, or if you have a foam yoga roller, lay that on the ground and lay on top of it with your spine on top of the roll. Just lay there for a few minutes, relax, breathe deeply. The roll should go up to the lower part of your head right here, and just allow your shoulders to open up and drape over that roll. Now again, none of this is medical advice. This is all just things that I have learned from a very intensive career of knitting and crochet that nearly ended in my teens. So these are some things that I do that make me feel better and that I hope would also work for you. As always, always check with your own medical professional or your medical care team and find what's going to work best for you in your situation. Number 4, use additional tools like ball winders and swifts. As many of you know, I do have several chronic illnesses now, and they lead to things like chronic fatigue. So using additional tools makes it a lot easier for me to be able to knit and crochet. Ball winders and swifts are something that helps me save energy, and it also prevents some of that repetitive strain that can come from awkwardly holding a ball that doesn't quite fit in your hand to the repetition on your wrist of doing this over and over again. You do that motion a lot less if you're using a ball winder, and if you're using a swift, you're not straining to hold on to something that wasn't meant to fit in your hand. There are other tools that you can use as well, and if you have some that you use, go ahead and leave a comment down below with what works for you. Along that same line, you can also try using a knitting belt, especially if you're someone who doesn't like using circular needles. Knitting belts are a European invention. They're also used, I believe, in South America. And what you do is, if you're using long straight needles, the right hand needle goes into that belt, and you can use it as a knitting tool to hold the needle in place, and it takes some of the strain off of your wrists and hands. And along those same lines, change how you're knitting or crocheting. If you regularly have a pen hold on your crochet hook, try using the knife hold. If you are a continental knitter, you might try doing English for a little while, and vice versa. There are tons of different knitting techniques. There's different ways of knitting in Eastern Europe, continental Europe, the UK, South America. So there's a lot of different techniques that you can try out that will make a difference, and what we're trying to avoid is doing the same motion over and over and over again for a long period of time. So you might try knitting in your normal way for an hour, and then once you get fatigued, you can switch to a different method of knitting for another hour or however long you want to keep going. Tip number 7 is to have multiple projects on the go. Sometimes it's the size of the needle and the material you're using that are what's causing the strain, and not necessarily the fact that you're knitting or crocheting in the first place. So by having multiple projects, you can switch between something like a pair of socks on some size 1 needles to a shawl that's using a size 7 needle. It makes a huge difference, and you just need to try what works for you. I know in my case, working on something that uses a size 10 needle is much more difficult than working on something like a pair of socks because I'm not used to it. But it's good to have those things in the wings just in case you need them, because I'm also working on a pair of socks on size 000 US needles, and those are not much fun, let me tell you. Number 8 is to look at what types of fibers you're using. I know a lot of us use wool, but not everyone does. And if you happen to be vegan or have an allergy or something, fibers like cotton and linen don't have much stretch in them at all. They don't have a lot of give, and they can be very difficult on your hands. So if you're going to use all vegetable fibers, I recommend looking for a vegetable fiber blend, specifically something that includes a little bit of bamboo or a synthetic material in them that has a little bit more springiness and give than cotton or linen on its own. Test out your different fabrics, swatch with them first, and see what's going to work best for you and what's going to cause you the most difficulty. Tip number 9 is we need to prevent eye strain as well. So make sure that you are enlarging your patterns as needed, either on a tablet or when you go to print them. You can do this by just going into your printer settings and magnifying them 10% sometimes is helpful. There's also a way that you can convert PDFs into Word documents that will allow you to change the font size if you need to. The last thing to look at is your tension. If you're consistently getting a much tighter gauge than what patterns call for, then you need to start using a larger needle size to compensate. And you also need to make sure that you're not choking your yarn. It's a really hard habit to break, but once you do, you're going to extend your knitting life and the amount of time that you can spend each day on your hobby. So those were 10 tips that I have to help prevent repetitive strain injuries for knitters and crocheters. If you have any tips that I forgot to mention, go ahead and leave them down below, and make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll be back soon with our regular knitting podcast. Ciao!